Thank you, Jared, for introducing us, and thanks everyone for coming this morning. So I'm going to talk a bit about collaboration in on-farm variety trials, drawing on my experiences in BC and in Wisconsin. And variety trials are important to different people for different reasons. They're a really important way of seeing how varieties perform in the environments where we're going to be growing them on farm. They're also part of the breeding process at the beginning, at the end. And for farmers, they're often a way to look for material they might use if they lose access to one of the varieties they're depending on, or to try out something new that might work for their markets. But research stations where universities are mostly able to do variety trials and on-farm variety trials have really different strengths and challenges. So on research stations, when we're doing variety trials, we're able to have a much more controlled environment and collect more data. Often the researchers have more time and resources to put into quantitative data collection. Whereas on farms, we have often the need to do a smaller variety trial. We might not have as much time to put into it, and farmers sort of need to work it into the growing season. But the advantage on a farm is that we're actually looking at the variety in the environment that it needs to perform in. And another really important advantage of on-farm trials is that we have a farmer there. And the farmer has an expertise about how the crop should be grown, and especially about what it looks like in an organic system that researchers are there to learn from. So combining both of these and doing collaboration between university variety trials and on-farm variety trials potentially offers the best of both worlds. We have the opportunity to combine farmer expertise with researcher expertise so the farmer expertise in how to grow the crop and the researcher expertise in things like how to design a trial so that we can really feel like we're getting reliable information out of it. We have the opportunity to combine the on-station research environment with an on-farm environment that's more realistic. And then we also, if we're doing on-farm variety trials that combine multiple farms or even multiple regions, we have the opportunity to expand from a local trial where we're looking at it just on one farm to being able to compare that to farms across a region or even across a country. And then finally, if we're building a network like that, that gives us the opportunity for farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing, which can be one of the great benefits for farmers in a project like this. I was going to title this Collaboration, Best of Both Worlds, or More Sites, More Problems, because then we also have a bunch of challenges that come with it. There's more expense in managing all of these. It's a much greater level of complexity. And data collection from farms can be really challenging for farmers to fit into their schedule, especially when it's happening at harvest time and when we're on a farm that has multiple crops going on. And all of it comes down to needing much more communication, that communication taking a lot more time, but being even more crucial than ever. So the success and the value of these kind of trials really depends on how the farm collaboration is built into the project. And I'm going to go through that based on some of my experience. So to give you a little bit of insight into my background, as a PhD student, I was involved in the Northern Organic Vegetable Improvement Cooperative while I was doing my PhD at UW-Madison. And this was a project across the northern US that involved a network of plant breeders, farmers, and research station folks, and funding from the USDA. So a very broad network of stakeholders doing variety trials to improve plant breeding for organic systems and to select existing varieties that were good for production in organic systems. And behind me are some of the crops that we worked in while I was involved on the project. The map here, which Lane Selman, I believe Lane Selman designed it, shows all of the states. The stars that you see are in 4 states. This is where we had hubs set up with research stations, either a university or in the case of Washington, the Organic Seed Alliance involved with a research station. And then around those were a network of farms that were doing on-farm trials. The dots are where there were workshops or presentations delivered. So it shows how there was a reach even beyond where the trialing was going on with this education component. And the design of this project is called a mother-baby trial design, where we have a central research station with a larger replicated trial, and then a set of on-farm sites that are doing a smaller unreplicated trial. So in 2015, I moved to BC, and in collaboration with the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security and Farm Folk City Folk, which is a Vancouver-based nonprofit, we put together a new variety trialing project to support the seed industry that is emerging in BC. There are quite a few smaller independently owned seed companies that were looking to figure out how to scale up. And so we wanted to do variety trials that would help them identify crops and varieties that would have a good potential for scaling up seed production in the region. So some of our other objectives were looking for those good crops and varieties, and then also looking at the quality of the seed that is already being grown in BC and how does it compare with some of the commercially available equivalents. How well of a job are we doing with maintaining these varieties? Building a research network that continued to work on related questions. And then from a social science perspective, exploring these community seed systems and how they contribute to food sovereignty and food security in a place like BC. Our trial design is very much modeled on the Novik mother-daughter design. We have a research station at the UBC farm. That's the upper picture here. And then about 20 farms that we work with throughout BC that are growing at least one of the crops in a smaller trial. One thing that's unique about the UBC farm compared to the experiment station that I was working on in Novik is that the UBC farm really is a working organic farm with a CSA, a farm stand, and restaurant sales. So most of the produce that we grow is already going into those sales. And we have staff at the UBC research farm that have a lot of experience in organic systems. So I feel very confident when we're growing these mother station trials that we're actually growing them in an environment with expertise and on a soil that really reflects organic management, which is a really fantastic situation to be in. To give you a sense of the scale of this project, if you're not familiar with BC, look down to Washington State there to see sort of the geographic scale here. And then most of our farm sites are clustered around Vancouver here. We have quite a few in the Fraser River Valley, and then we have quite a few also on Vancouver Island. And then we've been sort of pushing our limits with how far away we can support trials by having a few sites out in the Okanagan and up as far north as Prince George. To zoom in a bit, these are the farms that we work with more closely and are actually able to visit at all, really. So the ones that are there in the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island. So now I want to turn to the phases of a collaborative research project, or the phases of a variety trial and how to work collaboration into those phases. Organic Seed Alliance has a great on-farm variety trialing guide that you can download from their website. And it's designed mostly for farmers who are planning a variety trial on their own farm. So then in that guide, they identify 4 stages to the variety trial process: planning the trial, doing the trial, evaluating the trial, and making sense of the data. But when we're doing a collaborative project with multiple farms and with researchers involved, we have a few more steps and a bit more complexity to consider. The idea of participatory plant breeding has caught on since the 1970s and 80s, but in the field of, in social fields and in behavioral science, and especially in community development, the idea of action research has been around much longer. And so this is drawing on some of the older literature around action research, the idea of researchers working with a community to really try to change things. It's broader than just the variety trialing context that we're looking at in right now. And I don't want to get too caught up on all the loops in this diagram, but the important part to think about is that it is important to look at it from a systems sort of view and to recognize that we have loops that feed back into each other. Oops. So we start out with planning and that leads to action, but then that sort of could circle back to more planning, and then the action leads to results, but that needs to circle back also to more planning to more action, to more planning, finally to results. So these things are all sort of happening in a cyclical way, and we need to always be evaluating how well we're doing and being able to make changes and be flexible. So translating this into the variety trialing process, I think there's a few more steps that we need to add. After making sense of the data, since we're not just working with one farm, we need to think about how we're sharing the results, and then we need to think about how we're able to reflect and change based on how things have gone in that season. And then really importantly, at the beginning of the project, I think it's very important for everyone to get on the same page about why we're doing the variety trial in the first place, who is going to do these different steps, and how they're going to happen. So going through these steps from, mostly I'm going to talk about my experience in Canada, but also drawing on some of the experience from Novik. Planning the trials involves multiple steps that need to happen at the same time often, but also need to feed into each other. So you're often needing to write a grant before you can even get started, yet at the same time you need community input in order to be able to write a grant project that is going to address the community needs. And then you're also maybe starting to recruit participants as you're getting the community input. Sometimes you may even need to be thinking about what crops you're growing and what your experimental design will be before you can write your grant proposal. So this presents kind of a conundrum where it's often researchers who are writing grants, and they're often writing them under a tight deadline and not able to get as much input as they'd like in order to write the grant on time. So even though that's often the case, as a researcher or as a nonprofit partner or whoever you are that's writing a grant on the behalf of a larger community, if you can just get one, or better yet, two farmers to be a part of that process and maybe to look over a draft for you, to be able to call them and run by the outline of what you're proposing, that can really go a long way in helping you get started in the right direction. And then once you've gotten the project going, it's important to just know that it's going to change because you weren't able to get all the input that you would have liked to have at the beginning. Another thing that I think is helpful to keep in mind as you're designing the project is where you fall on these two continuums, from researcher-led to farmer-led, and from local scale to large scale. This is from a paper where the authors examined a lot of different participatory projects according to where they fell in these quadrants. And so you might be a farmer-led project that's starting out on the local scale but wants to move to a large scale, and what will that involve? Or you might be a project that's starting out being mostly researcher-led and wants to become more farmer-led, and what will that involve? Doing the trials involves a lot of steps that you really need to do during the planning stage. So creating instructions for farmers about how the crop should be planted or what data is going to be collected needs to happen during the planning stage, but also needs to be flexible enough to make some changes during the season. So for me in the BC Seed Trials project, I'm often turning to Mel Sylvestre, who is one of the managers at the UBC farm, who has a lot of farming experience and works with us on these trials. And I'm asking her, how would people usually grow this crop? And we'll use that as a guideline, a suggestion for the farmers if they're wondering how to plant the trial, and then with the acknowledgement that they should really do what fits into their system, and then be recording notes about how they actually planted it. But even doing it that way, we have sometimes gotten pushback from our growers. Organic growers tend to all do things a little bit differently. So we are probably going to hear back from somebody that that's not the row spacing they use, or they are going to use irrigation or not use irrigation. So you need to be able to be flexible enough in the way the trial works for people to do things differently. Then there's practical considerations, like who's going to order the seed, receive the seed, pack it into packages. We like to deliver stakes to the site so that they already have varieties, and we use variety codes so that it's a blind trial and they can just plunk those stakes right in when they're planting. And then your ability to do farm visits during the season in order to follow up may really vary depending on your geographical scale and what crops you're working with and how fast all the timing comes up. We try to do one farm visit early in the season and one around harvest time for the sites that we're able to reach. all of this comes down, again, to communication. And we try to figure out who's going to do the communication with the farmer through the season. One thing that has made the BC seed trials work really well from the beginning is the partnership that we have between UBC and Farm Folk, City Folk and the Bauta Initiative. And I see like Chris Thoreau is in the audience right now, and he's ended up doing a lot of, he's started out as a Bauta Initiative and Farm Folk, City Folk person, and now is doing his master's at UBC, so he's sort of both. But he has taken on a lot of the farmer communication because I often don't have time to do that while I'm doing some of the other planning processes. So who's going to communicate with the farmers, how that's going to happen, and also getting a sense of how your farmers want to receive information, if it's email or phone calls or social media, or maybe probably a combination of all of those. When you're evaluating the trial, a few things to keep in mind are the timing of those evaluations and how you're going to do the on-farm data collection. The timing could involve early season evaluations like seedling vigor, mid-season evaluations like the timing of flowering or when you start to see diseases in the field. Harvest evaluations are sort of a given, and then you may be wanting to do storage evaluations. So that ends up being a lot of different evaluations, and you may be able to think about what the on-farm sites do being fewer of those and the research station being able to do more of those. With on-farm data collection in the Novik project, we were often, at least in Wisconsin, it may have been worked differently in different states. We usually had researchers trying to get to the farm in order to do the evaluation with the farmer, which farmers usually liked because they didn't have to figure out a time to go do it on their own. In BC, we're trying to do a few more different ways. So sometimes having the farmers do the trial completely on their own with usually phone calls and support and follow-ups and reminders from us, but not going there. Sometimes we go out to the sites. And then we've also been doing group evaluations where when a trial is getting to be almost ready at a certain farm, we'll send out an email to farmers in that area. We call it a pop-up field day. They'll come over and do the evaluation together, and maybe we'll be able to get out there too. And that is a nice way to have an opportunity to build community and talk about what's going on in the middle of the season. I am not going to spend a lot of time on the making sense of the data and the next step, because I know the next speakers are going to talk about it, but just to give an overview, some of the things to consider are how you're going to compare the data that you're getting from the research station with the data that you're getting from the farms. In many cases, I would say this was sort of a lesson from the Novik project and something that I'm going forward with in BC. It's very difficult to compare some of the on-farm data to the research station data just because what's feasible to collect on the farms may be different. But if you can have a few things, like sometimes yield is actually one of the simplest things to do because farmers can weigh, many of our farmers are willing to separate the varieties as they're harvesting into crates and then weigh them each separately. They can get a harvest yield. Maybe they can do some ratings that we're also going to do on the farm, and we can compare that. But we still have a lot more variability in the on-farm sites compared to the research station. So I sort of think of the research station as one thing, and then the farm sites as another thing that I'm comparing to each other. And are they telling the same story as the research station? You also are going to be able to do different types of analyses and making sense of the data depending on if you're taking quantitative data like yield weights, qualitative data like ratings, or if you're doing notes. And this is something I'm really trying to look more into, is how can we use more of the notes that farmers write? Because sometimes those anecdotal observations are more valuable in understanding variety performance than the rating that we might have tried to make the farmer do if they can just tell us, here's what I think about this variety. Developing statistical approaches for this mother-daughter trial design is an ongoing project that a lot of us are working on. I tried one approach during my PhD with the Novik data, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with these graphs, but this is what it looked like for one approach. So this is looking, each of these boxes is a different farm site, and the colored bars are the varieties. The dotted horizontal lines are the average for that site, so you can kind of see in each site how varieties did compared to the average with that site. Or another approach, when you're using a box plot like this, is it just shows all of the variety performance across all of the sites and the variation that there was in that across all of the sites. And this gives a pretty easy general understanding of which variety did best. And then an approach that I tried out using with the Novik data was adaptability analysis, where we're actually able to see how if varieties were better adapted to sites that were lower yielding, so sites that might be on more marginal soils or have other issues going on, if a variety is really excelling in that kind of conditions, or if it's doing better in conditions that are really high yielding. So that's what these lines show us. The diagonal dotted line is the average of all the sites, of all the varieties across all the sites, sort of the average that you would expect in that site. So if a variety like, this is squash, so whoops, Metro here is performing better in the higher yielding sites, better than average in the higher yielding sites, and lower than average in the lower yielding sites. So it's better adapted to higher yielding sites. Whereas JWS 6823, not a fancy name, but a really reliable variety. Oh, sorry, I'm doing the wrong thing here. Yeah, is a reliable variety is performing better than average in the sites that were a little tougher, and it's performing lower than average in the sites that were higher yielding. So this one would be a good variety if you're not sure of your conditions or looking for something that's more stable, whereas if you're wanting to capitalize more on a higher yielding site, then you might choose something that performs better in those sites. So that's just one example of the kind of analysis that can be done with mother-daughter trials, but it's something that we are working on more to figure out how to make the most of that data. On to the really important step of how to share these results. Because if you're one farm doing a trial, you're at the end once you've figured out what the data means. But we want to be able to share it with other people. Jared and Julie are going to talk about databases and new ways that they're working on to share data between regions and between sites. At the UBC farm, along with variety reports that we try to develop each season, we're also working on a database of photographs about our varieties. So for most of our crops, we've taken really uniform photographs of each variety, and we're going to have those accessible for farmers to search and look up and be able to kind of compare for themselves what the variety looked like. And I also think it's important to think about field days in the middle of the season as also a way to communicate results. When we're able to have an event where farmers come together and look at the varieties together, they're able to take home that information right away in a very tactile way that they can make their own judgment about how the variety performs. And the same thing goes for having tasting events that we can invite farmers and the public to. So those are two things that we've done in the BCC trials that I think have worked really well. Finally, in reflecting on how the season went and being able to make changes, it's a challenge, but it's so worth it to be able to bring farmers together face to face in the winter when people have time to talk and can really tell you what they think about how the trials went. Am I okay on time? Because we do send out a survey, and that's been valuable as well, but sometimes when farmers have more critical feedback, or even just to be able to talk to each other, it's really great to be able to have them in the same place. So we've done that. We had a meeting just for the project one year, and then the second year we kind of tacked it on to another regional seed gathering that was happening. And then being able to incorporate those changes going forward is really important, and something that you should consider in the grant writing phase, that this project's going to develop and change based on what the farmer feedback is, even to the point of changing crops. If people, after the first year of trialing lacinato in BC, farmers felt like they had seen what they wanted to see. And fortunately, we were able to drop that and change to a different crop that was something newer and that they had more questions about. So the amount to which you may be able to have that flexibility will change between projects and based on the structure of the project. So if that's not going to be an option, then that's an important thing to be transparent about with farmers from the beginning, that we have these certain purposes and we need to keep trialing the same crops. But if we can be flexible, then that's a good thing to do. Finally, an important part in all of this that has been a thread throughout is doing collaborative trials often also means collaboration between research partners, between the research teams. So universities often collaborate with nonprofits or other groups in order to do variety trials. That's certainly been the case in the projects that I've been involved with. And I've been really grateful for the network that I was able to tap into as a newcomer to BC by working with the Bauta Initiative, which are the people in the hats, and the BC Eco Seed Co-op, which are a group of growers that have recently formed a co-op to market seed together. And in the early stages and going forward, to be able to send out an email to them and ask, what do you care about in this crop, was really invaluable. But having those kind of partnerships also requires another level of communication and acknowledging what the nonprofit and what the university researchers need out of the project and being transparent about that, and then having regular check-ins about how that's progressing going forward is really important and something that you need to build into your project. So with that, I think I'll leave it to the next speaker. Thanks for coming again, and we'll talk more about this later. Thanks.
Great. I'm going to use this mic so I can wander around a little bit. I'm going to talk about some of the trials that we do in Wisconsin, what we've learned from those, and then also more about a national collaborative that's getting started to do more trials that would be coordinated across regions, not standardized across regions, but coordinated across regions so that hopefully we can all learn a little bit more about how varieties are doing. So the Seed to Kitchen Collaborative is a project that I run in Wisconsin with a lot of help from my group and from collaborators. It started 4 years ago as a way to reach out to the local food community and also to farmers and to plant breeders. We have a few different components that I'll talk about that really try to stretch across the food system from the farmers to the chefs and other consumers. And actually, my grad student is talking more about this in the next room over. We got scheduled at the same time. So this started with a conference in 2013 where we had a group of plant breeders in New York, actually. Dan Barber, Michael Mazurek, Steve Jones organized this conference. And the idea was to get beyond just looking to heirlooms for flavor and look at varieties that are well adapted to current organic systems and also can be developed for flavor. And I met Tori Miller, who's a chef in Madison there, and we said, well, we can do this in Madison. Erwin Goldman was there as well. He's the bee breeder. We have a great community of vegetable breeders. We have a great community of farmers and chefs. And so we got started. And the goals was really to have more collaboration going on informally. We didn't want to necessarily have a rigid structure, but we wanted more information exchange between the different partners in this endeavor of producing high quality food. We also wanted to focus on new varieties, soon to be released varieties, with heirlooms as kind of the standard for flavor and some of the modern varieties as standards for production. But we didn't want to do a test of all the different heirlooms that were out there because Seed Savers Exchange is not too far away and they do an excellent job on that. So we wanted to encourage breeders to submit new lines so that we could tell them what they did in the Midwest and also how they tasted. And part of this is developing better methods of actually evaluating flavor. So I'm mostly going to talk about the on-farm trials and not the flavor component of this, but I'm happy to talk to anybody who's interested in the flavor evaluation afterwards. So the on-farm variety trials, the idea with these trials was to help breeders develop better varieties for the upper Midwest and better varieties for local food systems. Most of our growers, though, do not save seed. They might save seed from one crop, maybe a couple crops, but they're growing many, many different crops, and they're not interested in saving seed of every different variety that they like. The Midwest is also a challenging environment to grow seed in. We have warm, humid summers. We have a number of seed-borne diseases that are endemic. So it's not the easiest environment to become a seed producer in. We do have a few regional seed companies that are doing an excellent job, but a lot of farmers would rather support a seed company whose values they agree with than produce their own seed. That doesn't mean, though, that they shouldn't be meaningfully involved in the process of variety development. And so this was kind of our challenge, how to make the trials be an intrinsic part of variety development when we were not necessarily doing on-farm plant breeding with all of the collaborators. The way this works, or is starting to work, I think, is that we really have an opportunity because we have so many independent plant breeders and small seed companies and university plant breeders who really would like to incorporate farmer feedback into their selection process. And it's not that big companies don't do this too. I mean, we work with Vitalis and Bayo, but the small regional seed companies have a opportunity to develop varieties for a relatively small market segment and still make that profitable. And so if we can develop a feedback loop where farmers can have input directly into earlier generations, I think they can be meaningfully involved in selection without being the ones doing selection on their farm. We also have some growers that are getting interested in seed production, and those growers may become farmer breeders in the Midwest that will be selecting on farm and potentially collaborating with some seed companies for releasing those. This is our network of growers. We have on-farm sites that do a small percentage of the varieties that we trial on farm. Onstation, I don't know if I skipped a slide or, yes, I did. So we have on-station trials where we call all the plant breeders, email all the plant breeders, bug them a lot in January and ask for varieties that they think will do well in the upper Midwest, have good flavor, be adapted to northern climates. And we put them in on-station variety trials. Those have a lot of entries and are in 2 sites only. So Madison, which is southern Wisconsin, and Spooner, which is northern Wisconsin. We have like zone 5A to zone 3B. Spooner is very cold. It frosts until at the end of June, and then it starts frosting again in September. So it's a very different environment from Madison, and we try to take varieties that do well in one environment or the other, or both, and give them to farmers the next year. So the idea is that we can have earlier generation material in our on-station trials, but then it goes out to farmers still before release, potentially like a year before release, to help seed companies and breeders make decisions about what they could put in the catalog, or to get feedback on specific traits that they might then select for earlier, in the material they're still working on. So the on-farm trials then get a subset of those varieties that do well, about 4 varieties, including a Czech. And we want to get feedback that they would want to know from other growers. So instead of trying to collect quantitative data or measurements of, a ranking, a rating from all of these sites, we really want them to tell us what they would want to know if they were talking to another farmer, and what they would want the breeder to know. And so it's a lot more flexible. It means we don't necessarily get we definitely don't get everybody's feedback. I'm sure they get tired of me asking for their data sheets, and they probably say, well, I haven't sent it in yet. That means I'm not going to send it in, so stop bothering me. But we get a lot back, and they are very, very useful, even though they are mostly qualitative evaluations. It does not work if I point in that direction. So the idea with the qualitative evaluations is that it's not just anecdotal. We really try to be systematic about getting the same type of information from everybody. And that helps us do things like tell the breeders what percentage of farmers would grow something again, or what percentage of farmers thought it was easy to sell this variety. But we also want to be flexible enough so that we can get those bits of information that we might not think about on the research station. Like this tomato, I always sell my tomatoes without a stem on them, and this tomato, the stem will not come off. So it takes me twice as long to harvest. That's not something we measure on the research station, but it's really interesting for the breeder to know that there's a group of farmers in the Midwest that always sell tomatoes with the stems off. And that's basically all the farmers that I work with, which is different than in other regions of the country. We want them to also give us feedback on kind of what key traits they would want to keep in those varieties and what traits are problematic, or what drives them nuts about a variety. And that also can be useful for breeders if several growers say the same thing is a problem. This pepper plant lodges first in my trial, then that's something they should be working on. We do flavor evaluations at the research station so that we can give information to breeders on the flavor of every variety in our trial. We also do a smaller subset of those with a group of chefs who come together very generously every month and taste the varieties that come out best in our crew taste testing. But we asked the farmers as well what they thought of the flavor, because most of the farmers taste all of the varieties they grow. They don't sell stuff that doesn't taste good. So they are really expert tasters as well. And they might do a taste test with their crew or with their CSA customers. And so it's really helpful to have kind of our crew level data, the chef descriptions, which are more detailed, and then the flavor evaluations of the farmers, which is, yes, this tastes great. No, it doesn't. Some of them write really detailed descriptions that are helpful to know if there are flavor variations from southern Wisconsin to northern Wisconsin. There are certain varieties that, you know, they might be pretty bland if you don't get enough heat, and so they wouldn't be adapted to northern Wisconsin. We also do public outreach with this, although the project is very focused on the trialing. So the project that Lane runs here in the Pacific Northwest has a lot better outreach to the public than we do, but we do try to communicate to potential customers about why it's important to continue to do plant breeding and recognize the farmers and the chefs that are involved. So some challenges. I think we're moving in the right direction, but like Alex said, you always have to be willing to adapt. We've changed our data sheets for the farms based on extensive discussions with the farmers about what kind of data they actually want to know. And so that's what we ask them, rather than assuming that we want a rating for yield, a rating for disease resistance, a rating for cold tolerance, the things that we're measuring on the research station. They want that, but they want us to do it on the research station. What they want to know from other growers is like, would you grow this thing again? And what were the problems? So really focusing on that kind of data has helped increase the number of farmers involved. And I think too, the way we do the trials hopefully is something that a farmer could say, well, I'm really interested in broccoli, but they're not offering a broccoli trial. So I'm gonna use this format and I'm gonna do my own. And really try to make it flexible enough that the farmers feel like it's something that they could take and run with, that I don't have to be the one coordinating it. We just do that to facilitate. The goal to meaningfully involve farmers in decisions depends a lot on getting the data back to the breeders early enough for them to use it in their decisions on what to keep and what to drop and what to advance to seed production. And so that has been a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge. It's, you know, the whole timing of the crop cycle where we're getting data still now on storage. People made decisions 2 months ago about what they're doing. So it's an ongoing issue. We are trying to get more efficient so we can at least get it out the door as soon as we get it. I think Jared is going to talk some about some tools we're using to maybe streamline the logistics of some of this. We also, I think, need to be a lot more proactive about reaching more diverse audiences. In Wisconsin, we have a strong Hmong community, we have a strong Hispanic community, we have an African-American farming community, and a lot of them are not involved in our trials, I think, because we haven't necessarily gotten to the point where we understand everything that they would like to see in the trials. And so that's a challenge that I hope we'll be able to spend a lot more time on moving forward, is really serving all of Wisconsin's growers. And then finally, balancing the need for flexibility in ways that farmers want to participate with the value of nice balanced data sets. Because the breeders really would like complete data sets, and varieties over multiple years, but the research goals of the breeding programs need to be balanced with the actual reality of on-farm production. And so we're trying to make that happen by giving the farmers a lot of flexibility and doing more of the consistency on the research station. So then talking a little bit about coordinated trials, moving from the varieties in the trials in Wisconsin to coordinating across a national level. The goal with this would not be to say we're going to do exactly the same thing in every region and kind of replicate one of our projects across multiple regions, but to provide information to breeders who might be, in the Pacific Northwest or in Virginia, in Maine, who are interested in knowing how their breeding lines do across different locations, and it expose farmers to varieties that might have been developed outside of their region, but maybe surprisingly or not surprisingly are excelling in a region that they were never tested in. We did a breeding priorities survey a couple years ago on what traits growers need to know about before trying a new variety. And unsurprisingly, we found, I think it's the next slide, found that flavor is the most important trait, followed very closely by disease resistance and yield. Earliness was also very important, days to maturity. The specifics of disease resistance are a little different across different regions, but there's some consistency about what information is important to farmers. And if you want to see the full report with all of the different criteria by region for our region and for this survey that Michael Mazurek did and the survey that Organic Seed Alliance did, we have a report if you're a breeder and want to tackle some of these challenges. It is available from my website. I'm also happy to email it to you if you have trouble finding it. And I can give you my email at the end. So I am not going to go through all of these details, but we went into more detail for tomato, broccoli, winter squash, carrots, peppers, onions, sweet corn, and potato. We met in February with a group of breeders, seed company people, and farmers, and kind of tried to figure out how to launch this national coordination. And we decided of all these crops, peppers was the easiest. So we're going to try to do a pilot trial with peppers this year. If anyone is interested in either participating as a breeder contributing varieties or potentially a host site doing a trial, let me know. We also are very interested in getting all of your feedback on this idea, what information you would like to get out of it. Even if you don't want to participate this year, we'd like to have a really wide range of folks participating going forward. So the goals of this would be really to give independent breeders a platform for trialing. That includes farmer breeders, small seed companies, also breeders at seed companies that don't have multi-regional trialing networks. So allow those varieties to get out to multiple regions and see how they do. Kind of coordinate across regions to collaborate maybe on certain traits. So we identify a trait need that nobody can find. We see what's out there, and then maybe a couple of breeders say, well, I've got some of this material and you have some stuff that looks interesting. Maybe we could do something together. And then improving the methods, as Alex alluded to, for actually using multi-locational decentralized data that includes on-farm trials and on-station trials. Another part of this assessment was to see what the seed companies wanted to know and what they thought the needs were for variety development for organic systems. So how they would like to leverage these trials to improve their selection. And what they said was, we need to focus more on open pollinated varieties if we want to keep seed costs reasonable for organic systems. It's more challenging in some cases to develop a good OP. Sometimes traits are easier to combine in a hybrid, so having more testing would help us develop better OPs. So focus on OP varieties. That's not to say we exclude hybrids, but the seed companies we talked to wanted more OP options. Actually looking at seed production traits. Most trials only look at the actual marketable product and not take that all the way to seed production to see if this great carrot that we all like can actually produced organically a seed economically. So looking at seed production traits, having more opportunities to network with farmers. We have a field day every year. A lot of trials have a field day, so trying to get all those in one spot so seed companies can see where they want to go and actually meet farmers in the regions. Oops, sorry. Some kind of standardization of evaluation methods. We've kind of gone the route of trying to standardize how people report data rather than how they actually measure things, so that we can compare maybe rankings across sites, but at least we have the data in one place that's searchable and not a whole bunch of PDFs that everybody has to look through. Earlier trialing in organic systems, I think we all recognize that we need to do selection in organic systems to make varieties for organic systems, and then getting at this question of like how specifically adapted are these varieties, or how broadly adapted are they? Can they go across regions, or is selection in Maine going to create varieties that are really adapted just to Maine? So the North American Organic Trial Network, which is kind of our temporary name for this thing, is designed to be a network of some hub sites. Here are the sites that have kind of said they will do the 2018 trial. We are definitely interested in more hub sites. We would like to add trials for seed production traits as well. Each hub site then can coordinate some regional on-farm trial with a focus on the particular needs of their region, whether that's a disease or whether it's another trait. Jared is going to talk more about the database. We're working on getting a centralized location where we can get data together and summarize and back out to breeders in a quick, maybe even real-time manner, and make it easier for farmers to look at data, analyze data, and for other researchers to see things. We also have been talking about a way to recognize varieties that are really well adapted to organic systems, that farmers like, that meet a trait need. And that's Ken Green that has been doing a lot of the thinking on that. So with that, I just want to recognize that all of the work in Wisconsin would not happen without a lot of people. All of my students, all of the farmers involved in the trials, the chefs, the people that fund this. And my email is there if you would like to learn more about any of this. Thanks.
All right, so we went through a lot of the design of these trial networks and how to bring farmers into the variety trialing system, how to get more on-farm variety trials happening. And a lot of this, the bottleneck often that you hear about is in the data. How is this data ultimately going to be compiled? How is it going to be analyzed? And how is it going to be reported out? And ideally, how is it going to be reported out in a timely enough fashion that the people who are making decisions based on that data, whether it's the farmer themselves thinking about what seed they want to be buying the next year, or it's the breeders making decisions about which lines to advance or what new crosses to be made, how can that happen fast enough that people are able to make the best use of this data? And so there's kind of this bottleneck of making the data analysis easier, making it easier for both for farmers and for researchers to quickly and consistently look at the data that they're collecting, to be able to visualize it and summarize it. And also this question of how do we make it, the data, accessible? How do we make it easier for people to share data with each other? And so I'm pretty much just going to be taking one little piece, which is I'm taking this opportunity here to introduce something that we've been working on together, which is an attempt to try and make some kind of tool to address a lot of these questions of how do you design a variety trial if you're a farmer? How do you set it up in a way, when we talk about these replicated trials, how do you set that up in a way that makes it so that the data that you collect ends up being useful? And then how, and what does that look like? How is that going to be set up in the field? And then how do you turn around and take that data and be able to visualize it, and then how can you share it? So one of the things that we've been working on is trying to take all of those questions and all of those challenges and just put them together in a website that will help walk people through it. So this is I'm taking this opportunity to give people basically just a walkthrough of what is a beta or maybe even alpha version of this new variety trial tool that we've put up online for people to be able to use. So this is still in active development, but I want to share it with all of you to get you all a sense of the potential. It's up now, so I also am interested in people who have data, if you want to try using it and starting to get feedback and improving it. So this is where this thing is. It's calliance.org/variety trial tool. And the way it's basically set up, this website has a series of steps here at the top that you work your way through throughout the course of the season, from planning your trial to uploading the data and analyzing it and then sharing that data. And ultimately being able to access other people's trial data in the same location. So the idea of, okay, how can you see other farmers that are growing trials and conducting data, researchers, in a way that ultimately will facilitate, instead of it being in disparate web pages on different university sites, or lost in someone's folder, Excel file on their computer. So I just want to walk you through kind of how this works in order to encourage all of you to try it out. So step one here is planning your trial. So the way this is set up is pretty much all the pages are set up the same way, where there's a bar on the side that is sort of where you're going to be able to make some choices and some input, and then the main part of the page that's giving you some output and some answers. So in the trial design, we've set it up so that we allow, right now, two different designs. There's the randomized complete block design, which is sort of your standard, where you grow you have all your varieties replicated, maybe one time or two times where they're grown. All of the varieties you're growing in your trial are grown once in one part of your field, and then a second time in another part of your field, or a third time in another part. And that's called a randomized complete block design. The other design that this is set up is something called an augmented design, which is one where you have a handful of varieties that you call your check varieties that get replicated in multiple parts in the field. But then you also have more varieties that you either don't replicate at all or don't replicate as much. So with this example here, if you had the randomized complete block design, what you do is you select, I think I've got an example here, you select the trial type, randomized complete block, and then you enter the names of the varieties that you want to include in the trial, the number of times you want that replicated, and the name of the traits you want to measure. Then you just click the button, create trial, and what we'll get output is a little spreadsheet looking thing here that tells you, okay, well, you've got 5 varieties and 3 replications, so you're going to need 15 plots overall, and here it is all set up on your spreadsheet so that you've got them now randomized between the 3 replications for you so that they've been shuffled around, and then here are your columns for collecting data. And then this can be downloaded here with that by clicking on that download trial design button. If you download it, it turns into a CSV file, which is a comma separated values file, which is essentially a lot like an Excel file, but just simpler. And this will in turn be the format that you'll be able to use to upload the data and analyze it later. So we're making it easy for you to create a spreadsheet that in turn will allow you to be able to share this data and analyze it using the tool. The other thing that you can do is, once you've made your list of what varieties are growing in what plot, if you want to make a field map out of that to say, well, where are these actually being planted in the field, you just have to just below right here, you can select, there's a button just below that says create map. So after you've clicked create trial, all of a sudden one more little option pops up, and you can say, you specify how many rows wide the trial will be, and then that will arrange these in this case, 3 rows wide. So you say, okay, this is actually how it would be looking on each of the rows, or each of the beds in my field. And that also gives you a button to download that so that you can save that to your computer and print it out and take it to the field with you. So that's kind of the basics of how the trial design piece looks. The augmented design thing looks very similar, except instead of just having one thing here for entries and replications, you end up having one that tells you how the names of your checks, and then separately the names of your experimental entries that aren't replicated as many times, and then you can specify a different number of replications for each of those. So once you've got your trial design laid out and you know what traits you're evaluating, and you start to collect that data and you want to bring it back into this tool to be able to analyze it, the next step is you can click here and upload your data. So this basically allows you to select that same file now filled out with the data you've collected from the season, and it will upload it and it'll display it here so that you can do a quick check to see if all your data is actually, there's not been any miskeys, there haven't been any letters typed instead of numbers, or extra numbers put in here. You can get a quick glance. If you have data that wasn't set up in the format, if you have data and you didn't start at the beginning by planning your trial using this tool, and you still want to be able to analyze it, what you can do is right here, you have an option to download a template for either the randomized complete block or an augmented design, and that just basically will make it just has a little file that has plot number, rep number. It has a column for plots, column for reps, column for entry names, and then as long as you have the correct column names here, as long as you download that template and use these column names, and then whatever you want the names to be for the traits you're evaluating, and whatever you want to fill in down below, it should be able to analyze it. So once you've got your data uploaded, then the bulk of this program right now is in the analysis, in the summary and visualization side of it. I guess the other option, however, is, and this is what we hope to build over time, is that as people upload their data and at the end decide to share their data with other people, that will allow you now you can either upload your own data or you can access other people's data. So people who said, I'm willing to share my data, my trial report data with the world, you can select that and see the same summaries that you'd be able to see for your own data by simply clicking on the trial name and hitting load selected trial, and that will load up the data from a different trial. So once you've got the data loaded up, you can go over to the Analyze tab up here at the top. And essentially the way that this is structured right now, we've got 2 basic ways to summarize and analyze your data, but the plan is to build this out further with more ways to look at the data and more ways to look at different types of data. But right now we've got 2 basic ideas. One, which is a means table that will be sort of a summary across all your different traits for all your varieties in a somewhat visually friendly way. So what you do is you just select the means table and then hit run analysis. And what it does is sometimes it takes a while depending on your size of your trial, but a while would be like 30 seconds. And it will output a little table. And the way that this works currently is it's color coded where yellow here is high and green is low. And then these are the means for each of these traits for the variety. So if you want to look in that, and it goes across the different traits. So, if you've got these 5 varieties of sweet corn, you can see, all right, looks like Temptation, was the tallest. It had the widest ears, but it had the, one of the lowest flavors and lowest tendernesses. So the color coding helps you quickly visualize that. We also have these mean separations letters here that allow you to get a sense of the actual statistically, whether or not there's statistically significant differences. So the means alone don't necessarily tell you how variable a given variety was from replication to replication, and whether or not there are real differences between these varieties, or there was just so much environmental error, so much randomness that affected the trial that you really can't make a meaningful decision. So for example, here, with this dummy data set that I made up, in this case, plant height, when you see something that says AB, that means that it is essentially, effectively, statistically the same as anything else that has an A, an AB, or a B in it. So in this case, ambrosia is statistically the same for plant height as luscious, temptation, and who gets kissed, but it is taller than sugar buns. Sugar buns, stood on its own as being, shorter than everything else because it's a C. It's all on its own in its own group. Likewise, temptation here is only the same statistically the same as who gets kissed and ambrosia. So this is one of the summaries that we have. Once you've generated one of these summaries, you can attach it to a report by clicking on this button, and this will allow you to, whatever figures you create online, you can now add them to a report that you'll be able to download. So after you hit run analysis, this little button pops up and you can say, okay, I want to attach that to the report. The second analysis type that we have up right now is a data plot that lets you look at a little more detail on an individual trait. So in this case, once you select that data plot type, it will pop up which trait you want to look at. In this case, selecting plant height, and then you hit run analysis, and that will put up a figure that shows basically all of the actual individual data points in black here, and then a mean for those, which is the red dot, and then the confidence interval of how wide we would expect the potential variability to be based on what we saw from those replications that we measured. So this tells you, the raw data in the black dots, and then the mean in the error in red. And so this will give you a little, whereas the summary table is pretty much just showing you the means, and you get a little bit of a sense of the error from this. This really lets you, look close at exactly what's happening with each trait. And just like the summary table, once you've generated one of these figures, if you want to add it to a report to download, you just hit attach to report. Once you've generated all the figures that you want to generate and you want to have a report to keep, you have this third option down here that says create report, and there you just fill in the trial name, location, crop, and trial description, and then it lets you download a report as a PDF. And that basically just is a fairly streamlined report that will just provide that summary information as a cover page, and then have pages with all the figures that you looked at online, so you can hold on to that. So after you've gone through that process, one of the kind of sneaky things that's happening here is we're hoping that once people put their data up and start analyzing it, they'll be willing to share it. And so all this data, we put this kind of pledge here, which is the Toronto Agreement, which is saying that if you're a researcher or someone who cares about the value of your data from an opportunity to be able to publish this in a scientific publication or et cetera, if you want to share this data quickly so that other, so that the seed companies, so that other farmers can get this information in close to real time, you're saying that you're releasing this data for people to use, but that you still are retaining the rights to publish this first. And that in turn, when you click on the thing to load someone else's trial, you're also agreeing to that Toronto Agreement. So if you want to share the data, basically all you have to do, this will have been, if you had made a trial report and filled out this kind of the summary information about your trial there, that will already get pre-populated over here, and then you just enter in your email address in case anyone has reason to contact you, and then click share the data, and then that will just get popped up and added to this hopefully growing list of trials that other people can access. So goal of this is that over time we're going to be building this. There are some things that are clearly still missing. One of the priorities that is next is to add notes. I mean, right now we're just looking at numbers, but I've started the back end for being able to add notes and summarize people's notes on each of the entries across the different replications. So that's coming next, and then better ways to be able to, this is all on a single location basis, but we're going to be adding the opportunity to be able to look at this across locations. But I would encourage people who have data that want to be able to quickly analyze it to start trying out this tool, and if there's data that you're willing to share with other people, to share it up there. And then if you come across any either problems using this page or additional things that you'd like to see, refinements that can be made, let me know, because we're going to be working on this, throughout the next year. So again, if you want to take a look at it, it's over here at seedalliance.org, variety trial tool. And ultimately, some of the goals of this, I think, Julie Dawson has been working to try and really integrate all of these trials in a larger database, and we're hoping whether or not the database is ultimately just where is it, this list of trials or something more complex. Once we have the data, then there'll be an opportunity to provide some maybe other ways to automatically look across all of these trials that people are willing to share their data for. So that's the gist of what I was going to talk about. At this point, I think I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience for any of the three of us.
So if you're interested in learning more about doing a variety trial on your own farm, or if you are someone that works with farmers that are interested in doing variety trials, this tool, some of the work that we're doing with the coordination, is part of a grant that's also funding a couple of webinars on how to do an on-farm variety trial, and a publication that's already available on the OSA website on doing on-farm variety trials. So that goes through a lot of the details of things like the randomized complete block design, the augmented designs that you can use this tool to analyze. There's one in March and one in April, and Alice probably has the dates. I think it's kind of towards the end of March and mid-April. They will be announced through eOrganic. So if you're not on the eOrganic site, definitely go sign up for some of the announcements about webinars. There's also a lot of resources up there, and we'll be doing that in March and in April. So definitely tell farmers that you work with. If you're a farmer, tell your friends, and join us then.
Yeah, so first off, I mean, the only thing, I had just put this up as part of testing. I actually had some other data up that wasn't mine to share, but this was, a trial I had done. So this is the only trial that's up here right now. The design of this website is such that you have complete control of what crop you want to look at and how the traits are, what traits you want to be evaluating. So it all happens here at the beginning in the trial design part. You just specify, what traits you want. You type this in. You say, okay, here are the traits, here are the entries, and then based on what you fill in right here, that's where this comes from. So the only things that are standard basically are the column names, plot, rep, and entry name. This is how the back end actually knows how to analyze this. But then everything else, as far as what the traits are dependent on what you fill in. So, I mean, I would say as of right now, this tool is intentionally kind of left very open-ended, kind of a separate discussion as trying to create some more standardized protocols for some of those things. About flavor specifically, I don't know if, Julie, I know you had said you'd talk to folks after it, but there are many different ways to try and standardize how you evaluate flavor. It can be as simple as just giving, going from either 1 to 5 or 1 to 9 scale for an overall flavor, or you could break flavor down into a few different parts, you know, sweetness, acidity, and give those rankings to things that are more complex that I'll let Julie talk to.
So for a lot of the on-farm trials, we just have people go from, you know, poor to excellent, and that can be converted to a scale similar to this where you could analyze it here. We also do flavor evaluations where we're looking at more, you know, individual components. I think one of the things we would like to add to this is the ability to do a very quick analysis on multiple variables at once, so you can tell how they're related and which ones are the best for that. So that's an analysis where you would basically have a separate little spreadsheet for flavor with columns being the different components of flavor, upload it and do the analysis. So that's not up here yet, but I imagine we can work on getting it there. It's something that's not too difficult to do, and it can give you some insights into, you know, which ones are more sweet acid and which ones are more savory. But there are different ways of measuring flavor, and I think with the national trialing coordination, we'd like to give people different options. So we're not going to tell people you have to measure it this way, but give people some options that are all going to produce analyzable data and make it fit into the way that they're already running trials as much as possible, or have farmers do what really works with their system and not just be prescriptive about this is the only way to measure it. But yeah, some guidance probably is useful, like choose one of these 3. Good idea. Yeah. So for Wisconsin, send me an email. The question is how do independent breeders submit varieties for these trials? Right now, it's on an individual trial basis. The goal with the National Trialing Network is to have a one-stop shop on a website to submit a variety. So for this year, email me. For next year, hopefully we'll have a website up. The idea is to have some kind of statement of ethics about what can be done with those varieties, and that breeding material that's really early generation would be just for trialing, whereas later varieties might be something where you can't reproduce the variety, but you could use it in a cross after asking the breeder, so that it would be very clear what the responsibilities of the trial site were to protect that material, recognize the breeder's contribution, but also hopefully contribute to potential sharing of germplasm that is ready to be released. Yep. I would like to have more tools to analyze text. I think the key is getting it systematic enough that it can be summarized. So a lot of what I do with the text that comes in is go through and standardize the words. I think we could potentially give people data sheets that say, please say poor, good, excellent, you know, but I don't want to constrain farmers too much either. So it is a challenge. It's one that we've been thinking about a lot, and I'll let Jared talk a little bit more about how that data might be used. You said you were doing some tech stuff with this, right?
Yeah, so the moral of the story is maybe there's 2 pieces to this. One is that to get into the nitty gritty of this, you know, the back end of this is all run out of the R programming language, and so if we can figure out how to do it in the R programming language, which has more and more, you know, it's this open source community of statisticians that are always developing new tools. The way that I made this is you can plug it in as a little module pretty easily. So step 1, figure out who's already made of something in R for it, and then step 2 is convert it into the format that my modules require, and then we'll have it available. I think kind of bigger question is maybe like how do we integrate that? You know, this is on a trial by trial basis, which allows us to be extremely flexible. But then as we try and integrate across different trials and different methods, then it gets a little trickier. But certainly as first step, I mean, yes, I think the text is kind of priority number 1 as far as the next thing on this. So maybe, who knows, maybe in the next couple of weeks. Yes. I would like to have an option to be able to upload photos. The only limitation there is, the only limitation there is I've been a little, this is certainly solvable, but you know, to get into the technical details, the back-end storage here is just, you know, I made like a Dropbox, you know, site, and so that's where all the data is being stored, and these little CSV files take like no space, and I don't need to worry about it being something malicious because it's a, you know, a CSV file. It's very clear and simple. You know, as I start allowing arbitrary uploads of things, there will need to be some more caution around how that happens, just to make sure that the things aren't 7 gigabytes or, you know, have something that you don't want to be accidentally downloading onto your computer. So those are the only constraints to that, and then how to associate that with a given trial, although that's not going to be that will be pretty trivial.
We're also working with Nico Engelbert, who's in Wisconsin. He's a breeder who's been working on more of a social media type of interface for on-farm trial data collection, and that allows photos very easily. And so that might be another way of having a repository of photos that isn't necessarily in this database, but is using a common terminology so that people can find them. But that's been a request from a lot of growers, is how to share more photos, both of our trials on the research station and also with each other. So yes, definitely.
We have another question if no one else in the audience has a question. Someone was wondering whether the tool can also be used for trials that are comparing different things, because it seems to be organized by crop varieties, but somebody wanted to know whether it could be used for trials that are comparing different product applications like seed treatments or foliar applications, or whether this is just for variety names.
So to address that, the focus has been on variety trials, and as far as the database, so that being said, I think someone could hack it very easily to do it for any trial that looks only at a single factor. So it wouldn't necessarily be able to look at like a factorial trial where you're looking at varieties and seed treatment and different cultivation types all in the same trial. That would be a little more complicated. But if you had any simple trial where your treatment, you just had a single class of treatment, like you know, different rates of fertilizer application, and then, you know, essentially instead of entry name being the name of the variety, that would just be to hack it. You would just have whatever your treatment is instead of the entry name there, and just use the same column. You know, it would say entry name on that column because that's how the analysis tool is reading it right now. But if you just put, you know, your fertilizer rates or whatever the different treatments are in that column, it would be able to give you the same reporting. I don't have an easy answer for that. I think that's a really good and important question. And I mean, the way that this is built now, it does not accommodate that as much, in part because this was sort of built with the initial intention, and maybe the primary goal in some ways of allowing people that are doing some level of, you know, measurement based or score based trials to be able to summarize that information, and then secondarily taking advantage of the fact that people will be using this tool to then get the data up for people to share. It doesn't do a good job of handling more anecdotal data. I don't know, Julian or Alex, if you've thought about ways to try and compile that information in a systematic way.
Yeah, so not with this tool, but what we do is essentially ask the farmers to replicate one check variety and then give us information on the qualitative traits and how we try to summarize it. And I certainly wouldn't say we have figured out how to do it well or quickly yet, but we take each of the main questions that were the key questions that farmers wanted to know. Would you grow this again? How well did it sell? And what did you think of the flavor? And turn those into a rough numeric scale. So would you grow this again becomes 1 or 0, so yes or no, and 0.5 if the grower is like, well, maybe I think I would give it another shot. Then you can analyze it as a percentage of growers that would grow it again. How well did it sell and flavor can be converted into kind of 5-point scale. So then you can get a summary across all the growers. For a single farm, you don't do much summary. You kind of just look at like which variety was the best on that farm, because you don't have the replication and it's qualitative data. So you're not using the check to necessarily adjust the numbers, but rather to see, was there a problem with this field where one plot of the check died, or it was really shrimpy on one end of the field and large on the other. But across growers, then you can get some kind of numeric score of general preference. And then the comments, which are, best trait, worst trait, what did you think of productivity and other more agronomic traits, those are where I try to standardize some of the comments so that I can do something like the text analysis that created the word map for the survey. That is a much more time-intensive process, and one that I'm trying to rethink how we do it, because I haven't been able to summarize that data in time for the seed companies to actually use it well. I get data back from growers. I asked for it November 1st. None of them are done November 1st. They're still trying to get things out of storage, get things to market. So I get it, in January, and that's too late. And I need a better way of doing that. So I wouldn't say we've got it made there.
I haven't started working on this yet, but I have a plan about about working with those comments using In Vivo, which is a software for analyzing interview notes and used in the social sciences. It's not something that's very accessible. I mean, it's a software you have to pay for. So I'm not sure how, but so I'm actually interested in talking to you, both of you, about that and how to, because it allows you to code things quickly and then be able to do analysis with things that you've coded in a certain way. So that's something I'm hoping to explore over the next year.
Right. So we don't ask farms to replicate anything other than the check. And the check, what we ask them to do is look at your field, see the two plots of the check kind of at the beginning and the end, and assess how variable your field is based on how different those two plots are, and then kind of adjust your ratings based on if you think you have a gradient. I think if you're not replicating, the most important thing to do is try to make sure your field is as uniform as possible, because you won't have a way of adjusting for environmental variation on anything other than a visual level. You can do a lot of things to try to make your field more standardized, and really focusing on that before you get into the replication, like make that your first step. Whether you're going to replicate or not, focus on making your field conditions as uniform as possible. That will improve the quality of your data a lot more than a few replications in a very heterogeneous field will. So if you have rows where you're doing production and you have a relatively uniform field, you could put one variety in every row, have a check that's maybe twice, and do a visual rating, or measure something like yield, knowing that it's not going to be necessarily as accurate as if you had replicated, but it's better than nothing. And if you really focus on identifying problems and maybe isolating, like this part of the field got eaten by some kind of rodent, so I'm going to subtract that from the plot and only say, well, this was 3/4 of a plot, so I'll adjust it. I think there's a lot of things you can do. We go into various options in the variety trial guide that's on the Organic Seed Alliance website, and I don't think not being able to do replications is a reason for just saying like it's not worth doing a trial. Like, there are a lot of things you can do to make that data useful, even when replicating is not a reasonable expectation during the middle of the growing season. Yeah. Not quite, because you have a very different environmental window in each succession. So if you're planting something every 2 weeks, those varieties are experiencing a different environment, and so it'll tell you which varieties might be better earlier in the season and later in the season, but you can't say those plots are replicates of the variety, because each of them are in a very different environment. If you're looking for a variety that you can plant in any window, then you could use it more like wet replication. But if you're saying, well, I want an early season lettuce and I want a lettuce that doesn't bolt in the middle of the summer, and I want a lettuce that doesn't get, whatever foliar disease you have in the fall, then you're not really accomplishing the same thing as replication by looking at different successions. So I guess it depends on your goals. Like if you want one variety across the whole season, it's not really replicating, but at least you get a sense of like which one has the best average across the season. Yep.
So I think we are out of time. So thank you all for coming. And if you have any more questions, you can find any of us around the conference. So thanks.